The days following that night were some of the most agonizing of Miriam's life. The weight of what she had done, what they had done, hung over her like a dark cloud, suffocating every moment. The air in the house seemed thicker, the silence more pronounced. She could no longer pretend that nothing had changed. The kiss, the stolen moments with Daniel, the connection that had sparked between them, had all led her to this point, a point of no return. Miriam spent those days in a haze. Richard had noticed the shift, of course. His eyes lingered on her, his questions sharper. The suspicions that had been growing in him over the past weeks had finally reached their peak. It was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth. Miriam had never felt more trapped. Each time Richard looked at her, she saw the doubt in his eyes. It was as if he could sense the walls closing in, the secret she was desperately trying to keep from him. She couldn't stand it anymore. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of the lie pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. One evening, after dinner, Richard's voice cut through the silence. He had been quiet all night, his usual chatter replaced by a cold, tense stillness. Miriam had known this moment was coming. She had felt it in the air, in the way Richard's questions had grown more pointed, more accusatory. The time for pretending was over. "Miriam," Richard's voice was low, his tone filled with something she couldn't quite place, anger, disappointment, betrayal. "We need to talk. Now." Miriam's heart raced. She had hoped, prayed, that somehow she could avoid this moment, but now that it was here, she felt completely unprepared. She nodded, her throat dry. "Of course," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat in the study, the large room now feeling oppressive. The walls, once filled with the trophies of their success, felt like a prison, and the luxurious leather chairs they sat in felt more like seats in a courtroom than places of comfort. Richard sat across from her, his gaze unwavering, piercing. Miriam could feel her palms growing clammy as she struggled to find the words to say. "I know something's been wrong, Miriam," Richard began, his voice steady but filled with an edge she had never heard before. "You've been distant, cold. You've been avoiding me, shutting me out. And I can't ignore it any more." Miriam's chest tightened, and for a moment she considered running away, leaving the mansion, leaving everything behind. But where would she go? How could she escape the consequences of her actions? There was no running from this. There was no avoiding the truth. "I'm sorry, Richard," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Richard's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Miriam could see the pain and hurt flashing in them. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, almost too quiet. "I know about you and Daniel," he said, his words like a knife to her heart. "I don't know how long this has been going on, but I know. I've seen the way you look at him. I've seen the way you've changed, how you've become someone I don't even recognize anymore." Miriam's stomach dropped, and her breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined this moment would come, at least not so soon. She had thought she could keep the affair hidden, tucked away in the dark corners of her life. But the truth had a way of coming to light, and now there was no denying it. "Richard, Miriam began, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. What could she say? What explanation could possibly make this right? She had betrayed him, and there was no undoing that. Richard shook his head, his face a mask of hurt and anger. "I don't want to hear any more excuses, Miriam. You've crossed a line, and you know it." The silence that followed was deafening. Miriam's mind raced as she thought of Daniel, the one person who had made her feel alive again, who had shown her the tenderness and affection that had been missing for so long. But she had let it go too far. Now, both Daniel and Richard were in the same room, two worlds colliding in a way that would change everything. "I'm sorry, Richard," Miriam whispered, her voice broken. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. But I can't change what's already happened. I fell in love with him. and I can't take that back." The words hung in the air like a confession, a release of everything she had been holding inside. She could feel the weight of them, the truth that had been buried for so long. And now, it was all coming out, like an unstoppable flood. Richard's expression darkened, and for a moment, Miriam saw something cold and distant in his eyes, something that had never been there before. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't know how you expect me to forgive you for this," he said, his voice cold, detached. "I don't know if I can. But I won't live like this. I can't." Miriam stood up too, her body trembling as she took a step toward him, desperation in her eyes. "Please, Richard. I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Please, don't leave me." But Richard didn't look back. He turned, walking toward the door. "I need space, Miriam. I need time to figure out if there's anything left for us. But don't expect me to wait forever." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Miriam standing alone in the study. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilled over, and she sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had lost. The affair with Daniel, the connection they shared, had destroyed everything. She had lost Richard, the life she had known, and the stability she had once taken for granted. And now, the future seemed uncertain, shrouded in darkness. Miriam didn't know what came next. She didn't know if she could fix this, if she could rebuild the life she had destroyed. She had crossed a line, and now she had to face the consequences of her actions. But even as she sat there, consumed by guilt and regret, a part of her knew that she couldn't go back. The love she had found in Daniel had changed her, had opened her eyes to a part of herself she had long buried. And though she had lost everything in the process, a small part of her wondered if it had been worth it. Miriam stared at the door long after Richard had left, her body rooted in place as the echoes of his footsteps faded into the distance. The weight of the words they had shared, the finality of his departure, hit her like a tidal wave. Her marriage, the life she had spent years building, was now hanging by a thread. And she had only herself to blame. The house felt colder now, emptier. Richard had walked out, leaving behind the remnants of a relationship that had once been full of love and promise, but had been slowly eaten away by neglect, by silence, and now by betrayal. Miriam didn't know how to make sense of what had just happened. She didn't know what to do next. Her thoughts turned to Daniel, the man who had made her feel seen, heard, and desired when she had felt invisible for so long. The man who had become both her refuge and her downfall. It had started with something innocent, just a smile, a soft word, but somewhere along the way, it had become something she couldn't control. Something that had torn her world apart. She knew what this meant. The affair had shattered everything she held dear. Her marriage, her integrity, her life as she had known it, gone in an instant. And the worst part was, it wasn't just Richard she had hurt. It was herself. She had betrayed the very woman she had promised to protect, the woman who had vowed to never lose herself in someone else, to never let love or desire cloud her judgment. And yet, here she was, standing in the wreckage of everything. But even as the guilt consumed her, Miriam couldn't deny what she had felt with Daniel. The way he made her feel alive, the way he saw her, not as a wife, a figurehead in a marriage, but as a woman who craved more, who needed to be loved in ways that had eluded her for too long. She had fallen into his arms because they felt like the only place where she could truly exist, truly be herself. But now, that love had come at too great a cost. The confrontation, truth and consequences. Miriam spent the next few days in a daze, trying to make sense of her choices. It felt like she was drowning, suffocated by the weight of everything she had lost and the truth that she could no longer escape. Daniel hadn't reached out, and neither had Richard. She couldn't blame either of them. Both had been betrayed, in different ways, by the same person, her. Her phone buzzed one evening as she sat in the empty house. It was a message from Daniel. Her heart skipped a beat as she hesitated, wondering what he would say. Should she reply? Should she even open it? With trembling fingers, she unlocked her phone and read his message. I need to see you. I can't stop thinking about everything that happened. But I understand if you're not ready. Miriam closed her eyes, her pulse racing. She knew exactly what he meant. But she also knew that seeing him would only complicate things further. What was the point of it all? She had to face the consequences of her actions, and part of that meant severing the last link to the life she had destroyed. She typed a quick reply. I can't. I need to figure things out. I'm sorry, Daniel. The weight of those words settled on her like a stone. She felt her heart ache, but it was the right decision. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Facing the future, rebuilding from the ashes. Days turned into weeks. Miriam threw herself into work, into charity events, anything to keep her mind occupied. But nothing could distract her from the fact that her life had unraveled in the most devastating way possible. The mansion felt empty, and as she sat in the large, cold house, it occurred to her that she was no longer the woman she had once been. She had lost herself in someone else's love, and now she had to rediscover who she was, apart from the roles she had played. Her interactions with Richard had become strained. He had come back to collect his things, and though he didn't say it outright, the hurt in his eyes spoke volumes. He had asked her if they could try again, if they could work through the damage, but Miriam knew it was too late. The trust had been broken, irreparably. One evening, she sat alone in the living room, her mind swirling with everything that had happened. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was Richard. She picked it up, her hands shaking. Miriam, I don't know what to say. I'm hurting. But we need to talk. I need closure. For both of us. She hadn't expected him to reach out again, and yet, there it was. The weight of everything was pressing down on her. She knew they needed to have this conversation, for both their sakes. She couldn't live with the constant guilt of knowing she had hurt him, and she needed to face the man she had once promised to spend her life with. The final conversation. When Richard arrived, the atmosphere was tense. Miriam stood at the door, her heart in her throat, unsure of what would happen next. "Can we sit?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse, as though the words were difficult to get out. They sat across from each other, the silence between them thick with unspoken pain. "I don't know what I was looking for, Miriam," Richard began, his voice filled with a mix of hurt and exhaustion. "I didn't notice you slipping away, but now, looking back, I see how far we've drifted. How I ignored you. How I took you for granted." Miriam felt tears well up in her eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of everything. "I've been selfish, Richard. I should have communicated with you. I should have been honest with you. I should have never let it go this far." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "We've both made mistakes, Miriam. But I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you've done. Not because of the affair. Not because of Daniel. But because I don't know if I can trust you again." The words stung, and Miriam could feel the truth in them. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild. She could see the resolve in Richard's eyes, his desire to move on, to leave the past behind and find a new path. And though her heart ached, Miriam knew he was right. The life they had built together was gone. She could not undo the damage, and neither could he. "I'm sorry, Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen. But I know now that I've lost you." Richard stood, taking a deep breath as he walked toward the door. "Goodbye, Miriam. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you can heal." Miriam stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of those words sink in. He was gone, and this time it was final. The road ahead. The days that followed were filled with grief, but also with a strange sense of clarity. Miriam spent time reflecting on her choices, her regrets, and what she wanted from life moving forward. She realized that her path to healing wasn't about fixing what had been broken, but about forging a new beginning from the pieces she still had. The affair with Daniel, the destruction of her marriage, it all felt like a distant memory now, though it still haunted her at times. But as the days passed, Miriam found herself moving forward. Slowly, but surely. She began to rebuild her identity, rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried for far too long. And while the pain of the past would never fully leave her, she knew that the future was still hers to shape. Miriam had lost everything, but in that loss, she had found herself. And with that, she began to walk forward, alone, but finally free.